Hey, it's Dan Moralez, and this is Home Buyer Radio, episode number 148. Hard to believe that we've done 148 episodes. Hard to believe that I can come up with enough things to keep talking about, that I can keep this podcast going. But the reality of life is every day and every week, I have clients that have experiences that are worth sharing with those of you who are interested in buying a house, because my hope is that in the course of sharing this information, you have a better understanding of the mortgage process and how it relates to buying a house or financing real estate. So I have a fun story I like to talk about. You know, the title of this week's podcast is Financing Your First House. But it's not from the perspective of what you would think I'm going to talk about. When I talk about financing your first house, I literally am financing the very first house that I ever owned for one of my clients. So it was kind of a fun story. I had a client who was looking at properties and had gotten connected with one of my really good realtors that I work with through Zillow. And she was going to look at a property and was going to put an offer on that property. And so the realtor shared the address with me. And I thought to myself, that address is really familiar because I'm pretty sure that's the first house that I actually owned. And sure enough, it was the very first house that I actually owned. So it's kind of fun to go back and look at the photos and, see how things have changed in that property from when I owned it back many moons ago to now. But the reason I want to share this story is because, we talk about how buying a house is a really good financial investment for those of you who are maybe sitting on the sidelines contemplating whether or not you should continue to rent or you should look at buying a house. So I bought that very first house from my sister, and I bought it for $53,200 back in the early 90s. Now I can't remember exactly what year I bought it. I feel like it was like 92 or 91, but I bought it for $53,200. And I remember walking out of my mortgage closing, and I was this really young kid who probably didn't know what he was doing. I shouldn't say probably. I didn't know what I was doing. At that point in life, I was not in the mortgage business. So I walked out, and I remember thinking to myself, my goodness, I just signed up for a mortgage. My payment with taxes and insurance and everything was nearly $500 a month. So I thought to myself, how am I ever going to be able to afford to make this monthly payment? Now, I would be happy if my taxes on my current house were less than $500 per month right now. So it's all relative, right? But the reason I like to share this story is because, when I bought that very first house, it was this big commitment. It was this big, life-changing thing. And it literally was a life-changing thing because it forever changed my financial future, because owning that very first house opened up the door to owning multiple other homes in a really rapid accumulation of wealth, if you will. So it was a really big deal to buy that first house for $53,200. It was a big deal to have that mortgage payment that was nearly $500 with taxes and insurance, and a big deal for me to think about, gosh, the bank expects this money every month. I got to make this payment every month, right? So I say all that to kind of set the table, if you will, okay? So my client, who is closing on this property on Friday, now bought that house for nearly $180,000. Okay, that is like an over 300% return on that purchase price of $53,200. Now, when I bought that house for $53,200, I put 5% down. Okay. That 5% down was like $2,500. Okay, so if you think about this from a math perspective, I put $2,500 and some change into the purchase of this house. Okay, and that house now sold, probably 30 years later, if you will, for almost $180,000. So there is a profit of $130,000 on a $2,500 investment. Where can you get that kind of return? You can't get it in the stock market unless you are really good at picking stock, right? In addition to that kind of return, you would have had a roof over your head. And had I bought that house and stayed in that same house until now and sold it for that kind of profit, if you will, I would have had this ridiculously low mortgage payment that whole time. Far cheaper than anywhere else I could have lived for that entire, 30-year period, if you will. So I say all of this to say that buying a house is still an incredibly good financial decision for you to make, because you need to have a roof over your head, right? Unless you want to live off somebody else and you're comfortable being dependent on somebody else to provide your roof over your head. I personally am not, but you got to have a roof over your head, and it is a wise use of your dollars, right? You are going to get a better return on that small investment in a house, and it's going to help you to accumulate wealth way faster than you ever would any other way, right? I think I recently read an article someplace where over 80% of somebody's wealth is wealth that they accumulate from, if you will, owning real estate, right? So, to give you kind of my own personal background or personal story, I bought that very first house for $53,200. Approximately 3 years later, I sold that house for about $85,000 and bought my next house for $153,000, I believe it was. Sold that house a couple years later, and when I sold that house, I sold it for, I believe it was $184,000. Bought my next house for $203,000. Sold that house about 4 years later for, I believe, if I remember correctly, $250,000-ish, if I remember right, and then built a house, and then of course ended up selling that house, and then built a house and bought a condo and built another house, right? So I've had this, history of owning real estate, but the place I live in now, I never could have built or got to this point had it not been for that very first house that was $53,200. It all started there. So if you are sitting on the sidelines and you're thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to commit to this, it's just easier to rent, I can just go do whatever I want to do if I'm renting. Well, you're paying off somebody else's property, right? You're going through and you are buying a house for your landlord if you continue to rent. Your rent is likely going to continue to go up over time. You're not going to accumulate any real wealth, and you are just going to be passed by those people who have gone through and made an investment in themselves and in their future when they go through and purchase a house. So that's just kind of my quick story for the week. If you're on the sidelines and you're thinking about buying a house and you're just concerned that, gosh, I don't have enough money for a down payment, there are so many programs out there that allow for a smaller down payment that don't require a huge cash investment. There are a lot of programs out there that, depending on where you're located and income and so on, you can oftentimes qualify for a mortgage with no down payment. So don't let down payment be an impediment to being able to buy a house. You can buy a house typically with a very small down payment for most clients, and you can use that small down payment to kind of start your road, if you will, to wealth and long-term accumulation of wealth through purchasing real estate that you personally benefit from when you live in it. So, hey, I'm Dan Moralez. I am America's Mortgage Man. I just thought that'd be a fun story to share. Financing my very first home for somebody else who's starting, this journey, if you will, in home ownership and wealth accumulation. It is just a fun, neat thing to be able to share with this client and to have that kind of common thread and to help them kind of start their own journey towards accumulating wealth with home ownership. Again, Dan Moralez, America's Mortgage Man. My NMLS number is 709729. You can find me online at danmoralez.com. That's DANMORALEZ.com. Phone number is 616-931-4629. Hey, do me a favor. If you enjoy this podcast, would you do me a favor and would you share it with others? Help spread the word about Homebuyer Radio. Do us a favor and write a review on Apple. If you can leave a 5-star review and share how hopefully this podcast has impacted you. But most importantly, if you are going to be in the market to buy a house, we would love to help you finance that house. We do loans throughout all 50 states. Not every program is available in every state, but most programs are available in most states. And we would love to welcome you as a client to our mortgage practice. So feel free to reach out if we can ever help you. Again, Northpointe Bank is an equal housing lender, and all loans are subject to credit approval. Hey, have a great day. Thanks for listening.